didn't do the reading from Ecclesiastes chapter 2 to read as we go along. If you've got a Bible, you'll find Ecclesiastes. It's one of those books, you go Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, right in the middle of the Bible. And we're going to look at chapter 2, verses 1 to, well, hopefully 1 to 23, if we can make that. If you are visiting, we do kind of nearly always finish at 6 o'clock if we start on time. So, also should say to those who are online, it was interesting last week, we had far more people who listened particularly to the sermon online than we had here, so that was interesting for some reason. I don't know why that was. Right, what we're going to look at, and this is in the Bible, this is the text that we are looking at. We're going to look at laughter, pleasure, architecture, gardening, money, rest, stress, wine, women, and song. Okay? So a few things that you might be interested in. And what Solomon is doing, King Solomon who wrote this, he's trying to work out what is the point of life. And as he's trying to work it out, he decides he will conduct an experiment. And so he says in verse 1, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good, but that also proved to be meaningless. Now, what he's doing, what we read, I'm going to read to verse 11 in a moment, it's an account of what he tried, and he was very serious. So this was something he did persistently, it was something that was limited to what was under heaven, and it was something that was serious. So let me just read verses 1 to 11. I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good, but that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness, and what does pleasure accomplish? Well, actually, let me stop there. I think we want to go through each one. Laughter. Now, what does he mean by laughter? The word that's used for laughter means superficial fun. It doesn't mean having a laugh in the sense of, you know, if I told you a joke that you thought was funny, which is highly unlikely, and you laughed, right? Like you laughed just now. He's not talking about that. He's talking about the kind of superficial fun where people say, come on, let's go out and have a laugh. Proverbs 10:23 says, a fool finds pleasure in evil conduct, but a man of understanding delights in wisdom. And Proverbs 14:13, even in laughter the heart may ache, and joy may end in grief. And here's something that's profoundly true, that laughter often hides grief and sorrow. It is utterly fascinating that many of the most famous comedians are depressives. And I'll ask our resident psychiatrist about this, but I should have asked her beforehand. But someone like John Cleese or if Stephen Fry used to be the rector of the university I was chaplain in the University of Dundee, and he was just an incredibly sad man. But a great laugh. Everyone thought, oh, what a great laugh. Laughter often hides sorrow, pain, and grief, and that's what Solomon discovered. Laughter, I said, is madness. What does pleasure accomplish? Then verse 3, I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their life. Now here, he's not talking about the person who just goes out to get drunk. He's talking, the word is used much more of a connoisseur, somebody who enjoys a good wine. Now, there's an idea that the Christian church is opposed to alcohol and wine. Well, that would be, if a church was, there would be something really wrong, because Jesus turned water into wine, and you'd be saying that Jesus did something wrong. We just sang Psalm 104, part of Psalm 104, thanking God for the wine that makes glad the heart of a man. And I know that there are people who have to stay away from alcohol because they're alcoholics. Or I know there are people who decide to stay away because of the harm it has done in society or in their own experience in their families' lives and so on. And nobody is saying that you have to drink wine, but you have to be really careful about condemning people who do drink wine. Now, the Bible condemns drunkenness. It does, and that's very, very clear. But here, he's not talking about that. The embracing folly does suggest there's a degree of intoxication, but Solomon was very wealthy, probably the wealthiest man in the world, the Elon Musk of his day, and he could afford the best wines, and they were often brought to him. And he said, I tried it. I embraced it. I was still thinking. My mind was still guiding me. I wanted to see what was good, and surely this was a good thing to do. And yet, it still didn't show me the meaningless. And then verse 4, I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. Now, 2 Chronicles chapter 8, we read this about Solomon. At the end of 20 years, during which Solomon built the temple of the Lord and his own palace, Solomon rebuilt the villages that Hiram had given him and settled Israelites in them. Solomon then went to Hamath Zobah and captured it. He also built up Tadmor in the desert and all the store cities he built in Hamath. He rebuilt Upper Beth Horon and Lower Beth Horon as fortified cities, with walls and with gates and bars, as well as Baalath and all his store cities, and all the cities for his chariots and for his horses. Whatever he desired to build in Jerusalem and in Lebanon and throughout all the territory he ruled. Now I hope you pray for Gaza, and I hope you pray for Lebanon. Solomon ruled all this area where things are happening just now. He ruled from Lebanon down to Gaza. And what is fascinating is that he ruled and there was great peace. And there was great prosperity. He built projects. He set up parks and gardens and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them and everything else. Some of this, you could argue, was for the public good, but much of it was for his own pleasure. Now, the gardens here, luxurious gardens, were characteristic of royalty and nobility in the ancient Near East. I have no idea what any of your gardens are like, or whether you'd class them as luxurious. I'm pretty well certain none of you have a maze in them. You know, when you go to someone's garden, I remember my brother was a gardener for Dunvegan Castle in the Isle of Skye, and there was like 4 gardeners, and the gardens were just stunning. So we were at the Hunter Botanic Gardens or whatever, we were at that. They were quite nice, but I'm sorry, this is one area where Sydney kind of wins, the Sydney Botanic Gardens. But imagine if the Sydney Botanic Gardens were just your garden. You said to folks, hey, come and have a look at my garden. Well, he did that. He was able to do that. These gardens often had choice plants. They would contain a summer house. They would usually be walled to ensure privacy. There were great public parks as well. Notice the reference to lakes. Lakes were needed to provide water for trees. Trees were essential for wood, for ships and musical instruments and houses. And in all of this, there's a sense of grandeur, there's a sense of beauty. It's as though you were the architect that created the Palace of Versailles, and you look and you said, wow, I've done a really good thing. You know, we had an advert come through the door today. Would we like to buy 1,000, can't be square kilometers, it must be square meters of land in Whitebridge to build your dream house? And I thought, I wonder what my dream house would be like. And this is what Solomon did. He was able to do it. He had all the resources. He could do whatever he wanted. He could be like Musk and build spaceships if they'd invented them at that time. And then his wealth. I bought male and female slaves and the other slaves who were born in my house. I also own more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. Now, let me just say something about the male and female slaves. Every single society in the world, up until the British Empire in the 19th century, had slaves. They just did. That's how society operated. Many of them were the equivalent of what we would just, basically, if you were employed, it wasn't your work that you were hiring, it was your body, it was your life, it was your family. Slavery was wrong, but it was always there. And Solomon did that. He owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before him. He amassed silver and gold for himself. 1 Kings 10:21 shows this. All King Solomon's goblets were gold, and all the household articles in the palace of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Nothing was made of silver, because silver was considered of little value in Solomon's days. Now, if you and I had a silver cup, we'd have quite a lot of money, to be honest. But Solomon said, nah, that's just rubbish. That's just cheap stuff. That's the kind of stuff you'd buy, I don't know, in Bunnings. Whereas this is, gold. We go pure gold. And he had this incredible wealth. Money that came from foreign tributes and from taxation. Later on in Ecclesiastes, he talks about cast your bread on the waters. And he knew what he was talking about because he would send ships away from Tyre, and these ships would go to Africa and get baboons and gold. They would go to Spain. They would go all over. They would even take goods from India. And he had all of this. And yet it wasn't enough. The writer Doug Copeland, who's very good on this, the novelist, not a Christian, but he has some very perceptive comments. He says this: all you are doing with your life is collecting objects and nothing else. I challenge you to have a clear out of your house at some point. I just seem to accumulate loads of stuff, just junk. I mean, the time Annabelle suggested to me that I might not need magazines that were 20 years old, which I'd put aside because I was going to read them. But I have to keep them. I have to keep them. And you think about that, how many pairs of shoes do you really need? And how many clothes do you actually wear that you bought, and so on? At one time they did a survey in the UK, and they reckoned that around 25% of clothes that women bought were never worn, which didn't make sense to me at all, but apparently that was the case. But there's lots of stuff. Most of us are relatively wealthy in that sense, and some of us, we do collect objects. I visited my neighbor today, and it's just fascinating. In his garage, he's got baseball caps from every part of the world. He's got hundreds of them. So everywhere he went, he bought a baseball cap with the name of it on it. And I think it's a great hobby. I think it's really fascinating. And it's a bit late for me to start that one now, but he collecting objects. And some people just do that. They collect objects. Then verse 8. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. Now, there's a problem with translation here. It could mean, the word can mean a cupbearer, someone who was a waitress, really. But it's more likely to mean a mistress, a lover, or a concubine, because Solomon had several hundred wives and mistresses. That's one area where he went completely wrong. It could also be here quite a crude term which refers to women solely as sexual objects. So we're told, King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women beside Pharaoh's daughters, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your heart after their gods. Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wife led him astray. I find that one of the most amazing verses in the whole Bible, not least because I think he was pretty well astray by then anyway, but it means led him astray. So a lot of these wives, it was political alliances. That's how you did it. If you wanted to have a political alliance, if you wanted to ally yourself with France or Germany or whatever, you would marry a princess and so on. You see that, by the way, in history, particularly in Europe, for hundreds of years. But Solomon did that, and he wasn't satisfied. Now, I think a lot of men would go, oh yeah, imagine if I had that. Imagine if it wasn't just one wife, but I could have hundreds. And they would do whatever I wanted. But he wasn't satisfied. Then verse 8, he says, I acquired a song, a choir really it is, rather than, it's not, when it says I acquired male and female singers. This was very unusual. It was a mixed choir. They didn't usually have mixed choirs, but It was supposed to have been pretty good, and it was supposed to have been very entertaining. Music has always been important in human culture. We all know that. We hear songs that remind us of certain things. There's certain music moves us. John Calvin said that of all the gifts God has given us, music is the most powerful. It's a very powerful gift. So he does all of that. So you and I are not in this position. We can do this to a lesser degree, but to the extent of being able to have as much money as you want, have as many relationships as you want, build great projects and not be hindered by the authorities, because you are the authorities, the finest of wine, the best of food, best of musicians. You've got all of that. And then his conclusion is this: I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. The German poet Goethe said of him that he analyzed his voluptuousness and studied his own faculties of enjoyment. And Solomon was like that. And he's not looking at this going, it was all a complete waste of time, or I didn't enjoy it at all. What he's actually saying is, I got a certain sense of achievement out of this. My heart took delight. Verse 11 carries the idea of looking someone in the eye, waking up in the morning. And I surveyed all of this and what I'd toiled to achieve. And despite the fact that I enjoyed it, despite the fact that I did a great many good things, at the end of it, I looked and said, well, what did I achieve? Everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. In my native country of Scotland, there were 2 funerals this week. One of a comedian, Janie Godley, and one of a former First Minister, Alex Salmond. And people were singing their praises and saying what great things they had achieved. And at the end of the day, they'd achieved nothing. It was just meaningless. You know, and we do when we have a funeral. We think of what the person means. We celebrate their life. We mourn for their family. But if it's just under the sun, if everything's just going to be burned up at the end of the cosmos, then it's all meaningless, isn't it? It's pointless. That's what he says. In fact, he uses the word meaningless or pointless or no good 6 times. In verses 4 to 8, he uses the word for myself. And this is why it was pointless. I did it all for myself. I did it for myself. I did it for myself, and it was pointless. And I want to say this to you. Even if you profess to be a Christian, if you do everything for yourself, even helping other people, it's pointless. It's just a waste of time. So what he's saying is that pleasure-seeking does not satisfy the spiritual thirst, and therefore it's all pointless. In other words, the Bible doesn't say that any of these things, by the way, are wrong. This is really important. He's not saying wine's wrong, or sexual relationships are wrong, or music is wrong, or architecture is wrong, or gardening is wrong. But he's saying that without Christ, they are all pointless. They are all meaningless. So he then asks, verses 12 to 16, he's tried the pleasure route. He then tries the thinking route. Then I turn my thoughts to consider wisdom and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise have eyes in their heads, while the fool walks in the darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. Then I said to myself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said to myself, this too is meaningless, for the wise like the fool will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die. So what's better, wisdom or pleasure? Well, the king needs wisdom because he has to govern. Proverbs 8:14, counsel and sound judgment are mine. I have understanding and power. By me kings reign and rulers make laws that are just. By me princes govern and all nobles who rule on earth. And that's wisdom. We need wisdom. We need wisdom in how we traverse life. And one of the difficulties in our current society and in our current culture is there's this kind of individualism which takes away from the collective wisdom of the community, but also people need to learn to grow in wisdom. It's not just a list of do's and don'ts. It's interesting, isn't it, the banning of social media for under 16s. I kind of think it's a great idea, but part of me also thinks, well, they're going to have to learn how to use it as well, because when they get 17, you guys can use it now, I mean, how are they going to know? So I don't know. People need to learn wisdom, and really, as you get older, you should be getting wiser. That's not always the case, though, is it? Again, this from Proverbs, the woman folly is loud, and before you say, oh, what a sexist statement, well, wisdom is also feminine as well. The woman folly is loud, she is undisciplined and without knowledge. She sits at the door of her house on a seat at the highest point of the city, calling out to those who pass by, who go straight on their way. Let all who are simple come in here, she says to those who lack judgment. Stolen water is sweet, food eaten is secret is delicious, but little do they know that the dead are there, that our guests are in the depth of the grave. And one of the translations of that is that they are on the highway to hell. And of course, some of you will know the famous AC/DC song, Highway to Hell, and how it's often sung at, kind of talent shows and so on. And people think, this is a great thing. Make the sign of the devil and talk about being on a highway to hell. But that's because they don't understand what that involves. But Solomon did. And so his answer in this is to say, look, wisdom's better than folly. It's better to be wise. You need strength to govern. You need to know how to manage your money. You need to know how to do your relationships. And he basically says, look, wise people walk around with their head clear and they get on. Stupid people live dumbed-down lives in a dumbed-down culture. But then he really hits it hard. He says, hang on a minute. It doesn't really make any difference, does it, if you're wise or not? Because at the end, you both die. The foolish person dies, the wise person dies. So what's the point of it all? Solomon's saying, and he was the wisest man in the world, with all his knowledge and wisdom, he couldn't find meaning, so what chance did the rest of us have? And one final thing, he tries work. This bit's a little bit more difficult. So I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish. Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil, into which I've poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. For a person may labor with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then they must leave all they own to another who's not toiled for it. This too is meaningless and a great misfortune. What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days, their work is grief and pain. Even at night, their minds do not rest. This too is meaningless. He says, death not only destroys wisdom, but casts a shadow over all of life, because I'm working for all of this, I'm doing all of this, and I know that I'm going to die, and I have no guarantee when I die that when I pass it on for my children, whether they will be wise or not. And he says, I hate life. And he says that everyone's life is hateful under the sun. Do you know, there's a point where, as we as Christians, those of us who are believers, we need to be very careful how we talk to non-believers when they go, oh, my life's miserable and terrible and so on. And we say, oh, well, no, it's not. Your life can be really good, and if you just know Jesus or whatever. We have to be really, really careful in saying that, because in reality, they may be telling the truth, and they probably are telling the truth. You can't just say, snap out of it. And when he talks about toil here, it's the daily grind. Now, I don't know what you feel about going to work tomorrow for those of you who work, but do you spring out of bed on a Monday morning going, yeah, I get to work? Now, some of you will, but some of you will go, it's Monday, but Friday's coming, so just let me cope until then. Right? Some of you really enjoy work, and that's great, but others don't. But whether you enjoy it or not, the point is you work really hard, you can do your investments and your saving, and you make your house, and you do all this stuff, and then the person who takes it over after you die may waste it all. Solomon's own son, Rehoboam, we've talked about how Solomon did all this wonderful stuff from Lebanon to Gaza, united everything, built great projects, did marvelous things, and Rehoboam, his son, ended up squandering it all and splitting the kingdom, and he ended up, because of him, destroying 10 of the tribes of Israel. No wonder he didn't know that was going to happen, but he's just working it out, that that's possible. You can work during your life with wisdom and end up leaving it all to a fool. Despite wisdom, knowledge, and skill, there's no escaping death, and there's no guaranteeing what comes after. So what does all the work and toil achieve? All hope of a worthwhile life has gone. Wisdom and pleasure have failed. Human endeavor cannot be remembered, retained, or passed on. And it's not just useless, it's unfair and it's unjust. Look at this. I'm sorry, this is a bit miserable, but nothing except pain and sleepless nights caused by the frustration of knowing that it's all pointless. Have you ever had sleepless nights that are caused by that? I have to say that I'm a minister of the gospel, and I have sleepless nights caused by my work. And some of you will do that, and some of you will have sleepless nights caused by your relationships. You work hard, you've got physical labor, mental exertion, you're meant to go to bed at night and go to sleep, and you're recharging your batteries, but you're so stressed you can't sleep. I hate to quote the Swedish philosophers again, but I will. Benny and Bjorn, I work all night, I work all day to pay the bills I have to pay, but still there never seems to be a single penny left for me. In my dreams I have a plan, if I got me a wealthy man. That's of course ABBA, money, money, money. Again, Doug Copeland, as the expression goes, we spend our youth attaining wealth and our wealth attaining youth. That's a very perceptive insight. You spend your youth, you attain wealth, you get a bit older, you cross that threshold, and then all the treatment kicks in. I'm not saying you're into Botox or whatever, but there's lots of stuff that you can use. You can put the stuff on your skin that makes it look fresher, and you look younger, and you can do lots and lots of different things. So how can we be satisfied? And here's the answer. You can't, not under the sun. Not if there's no God, and not if this life is all there is. But Jesus says something amazing. He says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. Paul tells us that God gives us all things richly to enjoy. So let me just go over these issues very briefly, just to finish, and if you've got any questions, we'll take them then. How following Christ makes a difference in terms of all of these. So take pleasure. It's important to understand this. The devil is not the giver of pleasure, he's the perverter of pleasure. It is at God's right hand, as the psalmist says in Psalm 16, are pleasures evermore. The devil distorts pleasure. Take laughter. The Bible is not saying there's no place for laughter. It is really the timing and the object of the laughter. You want God's people to be a laughing people. It's not wrong to laugh. Or wine. I mentioned already Jesus turned water into wine. We had communion this morning, and it was all grape juice. I don't know how comfortable I am with that, to be quite honest. My denomination used to ban that because they thought it was criticizing Jesus implicitly because he turned water into wine. Well, we are told to be filled with the Spirit and not drunk with wine, and that's very, very important. Intoxication from wine limits our mental faculties, harms our bodies, and really creates havoc with relationships because it exaggerates all our emotions. But that still is not to say that you cannot enjoy, provided you're not an alcoholic or you're not prone to take too much, something that God has given for our enjoyment. Or the great projects, the buildings and the gardens, the creative and artistic skill. Human beings are to reflect the Maker. We're not just doing it for ourselves, but we are reflecting the creativity of our God. That's why art thrives in a Christian environment. You just go and look at, you think of the Dutch Calvinists, and you may think they were a bunch of miserable people. Well, just go and look at Rembrandt. Amazing stuff. And they see that they're painting for the glory of God. And then wealth. We use worldly wealth to gain eternal reward. We work hard to provide for those in need. There was a piece of artwork, supposedly artwork. I mean, I'm sorry the screen's not working because I intended to show you to it. It's a banana taped to a wall. Literally, that's it. And some Japanese cryptocurrency guy bought it for $6.5 million, and then he ate it. And he was going, oh, this is wonderful. No, it's not wonderful. How many kidney dialysis machines would $6.5 million have spent? You know, just think about it for a moment. It's not that it's not right for us to enjoy good things, but one of the reasons we work is so that we can provide for others. Or relationships. Solomon says, rejoice with the wife of your youth. Men should not treat women as objects, and nor should women treat men as objects. But men and women together as partners, rejoicing in one another and rejoicing in God. Or song, speak to one another with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, using the gift of music to celebrate the goodness of God and the glory and beauty of his world. I think of all the arguments for God, the one that I find very compelling, almost more than any other, is Bach. I find it, how can you listen to Bach and not realize that with such beauty there has to be someone behind it? And that's what he himself said. At the end of every piece of music he wrote the words, the initials SDG, Solo Deo Gloria, to God alone be the glory. Sleep. Jesus on the boat in the storm, the disciples were amazed that he could sleep. Or Acts chapter 12 verse 6, Peter in prison, and he slept with the chains around him and the guards around him. We can come to Christ and find rest. Now, there's a bit of a challenge for me in that, because I'm thinking, yeah, well, in that case, are we saying that if you can't sleep, it's because you're not right with God? No, I think it's because my mind's out of sync, and because there's a whole range of different issues, and there may be chemical things and all that kind of stuff as well. I'm not wanting to make it that simplistic. But I tell you this, if you've got a mind at peace, you can sleep a whole lot better. Because you know the opposite, don't you? You know that if your mind's not at peace, you're so agitated, and you get so wound up that you can't sleep. And it's like, see, when you're trying to get to sleep, that's about like the hardest thing to do. The easiest time to sleep is when you come to a prayer meeting, or in church. That's but it's funny how our minds work. Or work. Therefore, my dear brothers, stand firm, let nothing move you. Always give yourself fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. And I would apply that not just in terms of like being a gospel preacher, but I would apply that in terms of being an electronics guy, or a nurse, or a doctor, or a teacher, or a shop worker, or whatever. You do it because you know your labor in the Lord is not in vain. So when you go to work tomorrow as a believer, the first thing you remember is you're not working for the council, or you're not working for the firm, or you're not working for your immediate boss. You're working for the Lord. That's kind of easier for me at one level, but at another level it's not, because you think, oh, I'm working for the congregation, or I'm working for the presbytery, or whatever. But no, you're working for the Lord. So, summarize it this way. It's very straightforward. Without Christ, everything you do this week, although it may bring temporary pleasure and satisfaction, will ultimately leave you dissatisfied, like drinking salt water to quench your thirst. With Christ, even the most mundane, boring, and seemingly meaningless task can be transformed into something beautiful. Without Christ, it's all temporary. With Christ, it all becomes eternal. And that's just a wonderful life to live. It's interesting that, the film they always show at Christmas, It's a Wonderful Life, which is a great film. I love it. But part of it is thoroughly unbiblical, but part of it is very biblical. Living for Christ, serving others, rejoicing in the gifts that God has given, realizing that this is a world of sorrows and pain, but we still are traveling somewhere. It's life. It's the best way to be. And if you don't have Christ, you don't have that. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. If anyone has a comment or a question, feel free. Peter, I thought you might. Go for it.
My question is, it's sort of like a statement sort of question, but my question is, Solomon in Ecclesiastes seems a lot more self-aware than he is in the historical account, like in Kings or in the Old Testament. He seems like he's not really the same person, really, to me. Yeah. Because when he's in the Old Testament, he sort of seems like he doesn't really care about.
Yeah, okay, I got what you're saying. He seems, in Ecclesiastes, he seems different from when we read the historical account of what he's doing in Kings. Can I ask you a very personal question? How old are you?
34.
You're 33. Just think about what you were like 10 years ago when you were 23, or what you were 13. And dare I think, what about when you become 43 or 53? I keep a diary. I write a diary, and no one is ever going to read it. I'll burn them before because they're not written for other people. They're not written for posterity. One of the reasons I keep them is because it's a personal discipline for me. But also, when I go back 10 years, I don't think, really? Was I that person? And I go back 20 years. Really? Was I that person? And I think Solomon, what you've got in the Bible is an astonishing realism. So Solomon initially started off brilliantly. You look at the beginning, say, 2 Chronicles chapter 1, which I read this morning. Solomon says, I can't handle this, people. Give me wisdom, and I don't want money. I don't want all these things. So he's gone from that, and then by the middle of Chronicles, he's saying, he's got all these sexual relationships, spending money, acquiring wealth for himself, doing all of this. I think Ecclesiastes is towards, I think you're right, I think it's towards the end of his life as he looks and reflects and he realizes, I did so much stuff that was wrong. And to be honest, I think all of us will do that. If we were honest, we can look back and we can say, did I really do that? Was I really like that? And it's only because of the mercy of God that we would be able to stand at all. I mean, I don't like the idea on Judgment Day that all my life would be set before the whole world. I don't think it will be. I think it will be covered, my life, and I think all that's good that's been done for Christ will survive. The rest is just forgotten, thrown away, which is a wonderful idea. So I think I understand what you're saying, but I think that Solomon is a great example of someone who started well, who probably in the middle was really messed up, and who at the end of his life reflected on it and realized, do you know this? I've got so many things that were wrong, and he's written that down for us. Ecclesiastes is one of the most despairing books in the whole Bible, except for the simple fact that it points to Christ. So I think that's really important. I did get asked one question about wealth and is wealth wrong. Wealth's not wrong. And, we once had a Bible study where there was a big argument about whether it was right to own a Porsche. It's the wrong question, right? It's what we do with what God has given us. And look, you have to work these things out for yourself. There's not a salary by which you say, oh, that's a good Christian salary, and then beyond that, that's a bad one. I knew one guy who's a millionaire. He dressed like a tramp, but he was a millionaire. I liked him because of that, but incredibly generous. But nobody ever knew. For me personally, my Aunt Sheila was a missionary in Africa, and for all her life, she was fully funded by him, and nobody knew until after he died. And I love the way he did that. He wasn't handing out big checks with, look, here's my name and all this kind of stuff. I know other people who maybe have got a lot less money, but they're as tight as can be. Although generally, the poorer you are, I've found, the more generous people tend to be. Because maybe they know the value of money more, the real value of it. All right, I'm going to leave it there.